Let me begin with some questions. How we conceptualize new intellectual projects in contemporary higher education contexts? More importantly, has paradigmatic knowledge-making changed over the last few decades? Let me now remove a steadfast constant from the study of new academic paradigms, their treatment as pure epistemic objects. In fact, I replace epistemic certainty with a process-driven approach to learning through sharing experience with others. I refer to phenomena articulated on the go as pre-personal forces, rooted in affect. Such phenomena can be aleatory in nature and may replace the certainty that we study fixed projects with the examination of changeable projections of what is to come. My empirical focus is the so-called new mobilities paradigm, a paradigm founded at Lancaster University in the UK at the start of the 21st century by renowned world sociologists John Airy and Mimi Scheler and renowned geographer Kevin Hannon, amongst other scholars. At first, its proponents treated disparate types of movement such as tourism, business travel, new technologies and migrations as supra-categories of movement. With an eye to materiality, they prioritize the global, transnational mobilities of objects and subjects over globalization processes. This enabled them to focus on the political and cultural conditions under which all these types of movement take place, in particular temporal and spatial frames. 2 decades later, we find the same scholars addressing our planet's grim future prospects in contexts of environmental degradation, natural disasters, extreme urbanization, fundamentalism, terrorism, and pandemic disruption. The mobility paradigm's original focus on movement has been supplanted now with a study of the threats and systemic conditions that systemic conditions pose to human and non-human vital flows. It is as if Bauman's conditions of postmodernity have been replaced by a meta-dystopian plane in which all forms of life are under threat. My aim here is to explore the paradigm's collective psychic and emotional worlds. What truly drives mobility scholars to write about such dark presence? Significantly, most of them do not dwell on dystopias, but use them as gateways to futural design. They explore how futures can be redesigned to ensure planetary recovery from crisis. Darkness and brightness convey affective states rather than epistemic certainties. As stylistic devices, they produce this particular academic community's affective contours. And I must add that these contours reappear in an early mobility sibling that we find in critical tourism studies. Not in identical ways, but they do. I focus on clusters of statements repeated by members of critical mobility studies across different cultural and political contexts. These statements are affective in nature and have become constitutive of this global community's vital record as a whole. These so-called affective referents, to quote Deleuze and Guattari, are empirically traced in microtemporal domains, but theoretically they convey the macrotemporal dynamics of the paradigm itself. These referents articulate new agendas of care, planetary hospitality, and comradeship for living beings. From a tracker of movements in politics and cultures, the mobilities paradigm has evolved into a thinking with feeling beyond the futures of the human species. I want to shed light on what such post-humanist ontologies share with the humanist agenda of sociologist of knowledge Max Scheler. Scheler stated that entanglements of feeling, knowing, and valuing structure the spheres of value in social life. In post-humanist scholarship, the fixity of such structures is contested. The post-humanist consensus is that effects that convey values endow these communities that fill with vitalist flow. Both Scheler and Guattari recognize the processual nature of emotions, but Scheler sees them as rational responses to events. The post-humanists identify the generative role in affective stages that mediate between the rational and the pre-rational at all times. To reason is not to judge on fixed and stable scripts of action, because our present worlds are ever more unpredictable and uncertain in the Anthropocene than they were when Scheler wrote his magnum opus. Thus, I am more interested in the way Scheler's community vicarious feeling fits into more recent theoretical deliberations on the power of affect to produce resurgent communities, allowing them to act as scholarly multitudes in the age of multiple crises. In my project, vicarious feeling is another way to speak about affective action, collective corporeal transformations. Such transformations are not subjective in individualizing or individualist terms. Instead, they facilitate the actualization of collective forces, feeding into new pedagogical agendas. Much like the critical tourism studies scholarly community, critical mobility scholars cultivate through their work particular sensibilities of disciplinary comradeship, which attune them to particular projects of socio-political depth. This attunement is calibrated through transductions of reference, not mere repetitions of signs across scholarly territories, but transformations of them into pedagogical programs. Affects of care, risk, empathy, and more transform into normative forces, guiding the mobility scholarly paradigm. The more effects transduce, the more research produces repositories of knowledge about futures to come. Thus, affective reference appear and fade as new concerns and priorities emerge in the horizon, as is the case with the enrichment of the original master terms of movement and system with those of vitality versus condition, design, molecular and molar movement, crisis and risk management, but also elasticity, adaptation, and hope. This is how the new mobilities paradigm is currently changing. The temporalities on which the mobility studies community bases its current reference are forward-looking. The thematic style is deliberative engagement with controversies. The themes vary, but some stand out as reference. The first is that of the legacies of crisis. This involves the increased complexification of capitalism and the ensuing social, systemic, and environmental problems it induces. Entanglements between climate catastrophes and hyper-urbanization, followed by bad entropies of authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and fundamentalism, and an attempt of such forms of governance to smother the metastable horizon of hopeful futurist design by intellectual communities. The second refrain manifests as a tendency to move from old post-test agendas, the post-structural, post-identity, post-colonial, to a clear horizon of de-thinking and de-linking from dark past, without forgetting their nature. This can be both conventionally activist or speculative, and unconventionally artistic, as forms of creative action. Prominent are those of therapeutic storytelling about genocides, legacies of slavery, and now also climate disaster and multi-species extinction. And the fourth refrain, which encompasses the previous three, involves the design of transductions, a selection of hopeful scenarios from the potential versions of things to come to operationalize in the form of viable futures. My aim in this evolving investigation into what Scheler termed the new mobilities paradigm, and I'm talking here about Mimi Scheler, not Max Scheler. So my investigation into this paradigm for a live sociology is to record these transnational intellectual communities' stylistic attempts to realize now-utopias of flourishing. It's more than human now futurist designs propel me to replace Max Scheler's analysis of structured emotions with a more dynamic vision of more than human pluriversal entanglements of knowledge, feeling, valuing as a whole. Scheler's work is of more use in other analysis contexts, which may prioritize considerations of sociocultural biographies in context of collective action, or conflicts between scholarly utopian activism and institutional agendas. But these are not really the focus of this talk. I explore them elsewhere. Thank you for listening.